Chapter 17 Driving School. Remember the night that the trucker let the evil overlord and me look in his truck? That was the night that kick-started our journey into trucking. We decided I would learn to drive a truck first, since I was already somewhat accustomed to them. As I mentioned earlier, as part of my dock job, I had already learned to back the trailers into the dock doors for loading. Now I just had to learn to use gears other than first and reverse. No problem. You see, I had the perfect opportunity to learn. As fate would have it, my Uncle Stan owned a small trucking company that included 3 or 4 trucks and a trailer. It just so happened that his trucking company was responsible for hauling eggs in and out of that very plant where we worked. Sounds like fate, doesn't it? My plan was to pass the necessary written tests, obtain my learner's permit, and then let one of his drivers teach me how to drive. Voila! I'd learn to drive for the cost of a learner's permit. So what if there was a trucking school at our local community college? That would have cost $3,000 each. Now don't panic, not all of them cost this much, although some of them actually cost more. I was going to get off a heck of a lot cheaper going through good old Uncle Stan. Bear with me, there is a point to this story. I remember being extremely nervous when approaching Uncle Stan about my plan. He was a great guy that I always had a decent relationship with, but laughing over a joke is a bit different than asking a man if you can abuse the transmission of his truck while you learn to shift to 10-speed. To his credit, or insanity, and my relief, he approved, agreeing to let me ride along with my favorite driver, a guy by the name of Donnie. Now, Donnie and I were polar opposites, but we got along like beans and rice. I'll not say which one of us was the farty one. I'm a city boy who grew up in a small town. He was a self-proclaimed redneck raised out in the boondocks. I knew the extent of our difference when one night he was telling me about a wrestling match he had just seen on TV. He was so serious about the ass-kicking that was dished out, saying, "Man, you should have seen all the blood." I wasn't sure whether he was joking or not, so I said, "You know none of that stuff is real, don't you?" At first, he denied it altogether. He hem-hawed around until he finally admitted that he knew the matches were choreographed. "But that blood is real," he insisted. "They're really hitting each other." I let it ride as I slowly shook my head. I hadn't told my nephews that Santa Claus wasn't real. Why should I ruin it for Donnie? My virgin run. Just as I had planned, I studied the books and obtained my learner's permit, which required nothing more than a written test. My first trip with Donnie was going to Kansas City to deliver eggs to a bunch of grocery stores. We left around 3 a.m. so we could beat rush hour traffic and make our first delivery by 6 a.m. He drove first, showing me how to shift without a clutch, which is something one doesn't normally learn right off the bat. As soon as we got out of town, he hit the shoulder and we swapped places. I took off with less gear grinding than I expected. It certainly wasn't perfect, but it was far better than it could have been for a rookie. 15 minutes into the trip, he said, "I can really tell whether I trust a rookie driver or not. Wake me up when you get there. Holler if you need me." With that, he hopped in the back bunk and promptly fell asleep. I guess he trusted me, the crazy fool. Yeah, I know. I was crapping my drawers too. There I was on my maiden voyage going 75 miles per hour in a big rig in the wee hours of pre-dawn. Thank God the roads were deserted. I actually did pretty good keeping it in my lane, all things considered. Eventually, though, the city came into view and it came time to downshift. Man, but I ground those gears good. Between grinding gears and screaming like a little girl, Donnie woke up. He had neglected to inform me that downshifting is 10 times harder than upshifting. It seems that there's a special technique that I had no clue how to execute. Thanks for letting me know, buddy old pal. I didn't do much downshifting that day, instead choosing to coast up to stoplights rather than downshift. I was getting quite good at upshifting, though. Those Kansas City residents must have noticed how good I was doing, too, because plenty of them showed me that I was number 1 in their book. People can be so nice and supportive sometimes. The easiest part of my day was backing into the numerous docks at the store. Then again, I already had tons of practice doing that. Most of that day went by in a blur, but by the time it ended, I knew that I'd be able to learn to drive that behemoth. I was fairly confident I'd eventually learn to downshift without shrieking, too. Now on to the point of that long, drawn-out story. Come to find out, my first run with Donnie was my last. Shortly after, I contacted a trucking company to ask a few questions. During the conversation, I revealed that I was learning to drive with Donnie and a learner's permit. No go. The driver recruiter explained to me that only small companies like Uncle Stan's would hire me without going to a real driving school. The reason? Insurance. It seems that insurance providers that insure trucking companies want proof that you've had decent training before they're willing to cover their drivers. I can't imagine why. I mean, I was getting great training in between Donnie's snores. I called a few other companies to verify what I had been told and soon found out that no one would touch me without formal training. So, do you need to go to trucking school? Well, that all depends if you want to drive locally for Uncle Stan or for one of the big national carriers. Uncle Stan's insurance may not require driving school. Either it didn't or he hadn't checked. You'll have to ask Uncle Stan about that. Tell him a good joke when you see him. He loves them. For most people, though, I highly recommend the latter. You'll make a heck of a lot more money driving for a large carrier, and you won't have to worry about your paycheck bouncing, which has been known to happen with some smaller trucking companies. Not to mention that most tiny companies won't want you driving one of their trucks if you don't have any experience. But a large company will want to get at you as bad as a rat terrier wants that peanut butter you stuck to the roof of his mouth. Finding a trucking school. You may already know of a driving school near you. If you do, it may be your best option, but I'd advise you to do some research before you automatically go there just because it's close to your house. One way to find truck driving schools is by looking in some of those free trucker magazines that you can pick up at most truck stops. However, the best way to find a trucking school is the best way to find any information nowadays, the internet. Just do a search for trucking schools or truck driving schools, and a whole mess of options will come up. You could still pick a school close to your house, but that could be a huge mistake. You could also pick the shortest school, but I can't really recommend that either. I'll explain why in a bit. As I've said before, we had a trucking school right there in our hometown. Had we not looked at any other options, we would have spent $3,000 each. After further research, though, we learned there was a 6-week school in Wichita, Kansas that was associated with a technical college. Did you remember that the evil overlord had relatives that lived near Wichita? Remember that fate thing? Unfortunately, we called the school and found out that it would be almost as expensive as our local school because we lived out of state. Something about that whole out-of-state college tuition thing. They said that if we could become Kansas residents, it would be much, much cheaper. In the end, it would cost us less than $700 each after a government grant picked up part of the bill providing we could establish residency in Kansas. Sweet. See, the government isn't completely worthless. We talked to the relatives and asked if it would be okay to stay there and establish residency while we attended school. They had an extra bedroom in the basement with its own bathroom. Our own bathroom! Heck, that was better than where we were staying currently, which was with the evil overlord's parents. We had to share a bathroom with them. There's just something inherently wrong with using the same toilet seat as your father-in-law, especially when it's still warm. The relatives agreed to let us move in for the duration of trucking school. Being the nice folks that they are, they didn't even charge us rent. Double sweet. By the way, thanks again, Eric, Kim, and Kyle. We really like that setup. No rent, our own basement bedroom, and our own bathroom in a nice house. We're planning on moving back in with them permanently once we get off the road for good. Of course, we haven't told them yet. I'll have to see if they'll throw in meals and cable TV, too. As you can see, choosing to go to a different school than our local one paid off for us. Still, that was mainly due to some gullible relatives who didn't charge us for rent. If we had to pay for a hotel all that time, it would have been far cheaper for us to attend our local school. Some schools offer room and board as part of the price. If you can find a school that offers room and board and is cheaper than your local school, then good for you. On the other hand, if you have to foot the bill for a hotel and food for the duration of an away-from-home school, you may be better off paying the higher price at your local school. I had a classmate at driving school who drove almost 200 miles round trip every day for 6 weeks to avoid paying for a hotel. If gas prices had been as high as they are these days, he probably would have been better off getting a roach hotel during the weekdays and going home on the weekends. If you are extremely lucky, your local school will have a great reputation, it'll be the cheapest one you find, and you can still sleep at home. If you happen to be that lucky, please send me the Powerball numbers for this Saturday's drawing. Most likely what will happen is you'll pay a little bit more in tuition and or gas to allow you to stay at home while you attend school. The cost of driving school. Driving school will cost you anywhere from $6,000 to absolutely free. Depending on the school, you may be able to get a government grant to cover part or all of the tuition. Ask the school you're interested in if you're eligible for government assistance. Other schools have arrangements with trucking companies that will help to pay all or part of your tuition, providing you go to work for them after you graduate, of course. Most driving schools offer some sort of financing if you don't have the cash to attend. Your tuition may or may not include meals and a hotel. Each school varies greatly, so you're really going to have to do your research and call a lot of them to figure out what option will work best for you. And make sure you're comparing apples to apples. The length of driving school. The shortest school I've ever heard of was only 1 week long.
Is it even possible to learn to safely drive a 70-foot, 80,000-pound vehicle in 1 week?
Fat chance. More typical are programs that range from 2 to 12 weeks. Our school was a happy medium of 6 weeks. Some even offer evening classes. Just find one that fits your schedule. Remember when I said there are ways to attend driving school without any upfront money? As I said earlier, you might be able to get a federal grant to pay for it, but what I was specifically talking about is going to a school that's operated by a trucking company. The problem with that is that you need to pick your employer before you pick your school. That'll be hard to do if you don't know what kind of questions to ask the company's recruiter. Hey, looky, another reason to check out how to find a great truck driving job. Of course, there's a link to find out how to order that. Like most things in life that are free, there's a catch to a free school. If you choose a trucking company that operates a driving school, they'll probably do one of two things. In both of these options, there's likely little or no upfront money coming out of your pocket. Room and board, 1 or 2 meals daily, may or may not be provided, depending on how close you live to the school. Be sure you ask what's included in the cost of tuition when you talk to them. Option 1. Once you graduate and start working for them, they take your school tuition out of your paycheck at a set amount every week, for example, $50 a week, until they're repaid. If you quit before the debt is paid off, you'll owe them the difference when you walk out the door. Option 2. They pay for your school in exchange for you signing a contract to work for them for a specified amount of time. For example, let's say it was a year, which is pretty typical. If you work for them for 1 full year, you just got your driver training for free. Cool, huh? But what if you find out that you hate that company for whatever reason? Here's the bad part. If you leave before your contract is complete, they'll either prorate the amount you owe or more likely charge you for the entire amount. Again, this all depends on their company policy, so you better be sure you like that company before you sign that contract. And quite honestly, there's no way to truly know whether you'll like driving for them until you're actually doing it. For these options, you may or may not pay a higher tuition cost for the convenience of not having to pay for school in advance. If you're flat out broke, this may be your only option. Ask around and get on the internet and the phone to find a company that offers a driving school or will send you to an independent school outside of the company. I know a few of them, but I said early on that I wouldn't be recommending any particular trucking companies, and I'm holding to that. They won't be hard to find, though. If you've got the cash, you can attend any school you want. Locate some schools you're interested in and get some information sent to you. Call them and ask about their curriculum. How much does it cost? Is room and board included in that, if you actually need it? Do you offer financing? How long is the truck school? What's the student-to-teacher ratio? That's how many students per truck. What kind of equipment do they have? We'll have a story about this in a bit. And the biggest question of all, how much driving time will you get? Naturally, the more drive time, the better. But if your house is going to be foreclosed on in 3 months, you may not have time to attend a 12-week class. You need money ASAP. Lastly, ask for referrals and contact them to see what they say about the school. Keep in mind, they're probably only going to give you names of satisfied students. The length of a class doesn't necessarily relate to driving time. It's completely possible that you could get more driving time in a 6-week class than a 12-week class, if that longer class is an evening or weekend program. That's why you need to ask gobs of questions. Recruiters. During driving school, your class will likely be visited by numerous company recruiters. They'll come in and do their talk and then answer any questions you may have. This is a great way to get exposure to a lot of different companies. Granted, they may not always be what you're looking for. Ask loads of questions and decide for yourself. Ultimately, we hired on with a company that sent a recruiter to our school, and we found it to be a pleasant experience. Others in our classes weren't so fortunate. Naturally, if you hire on with a trucking company and go to their in-house driving school, you won't be talking to recruiters from any other companies. I shouldn't have to say that, but once again, you never know when people have given their brains the afternoon off. Better safe than sorry. There's another one of those mom and dad isms. Remember when I said I couldn't, in clear conscience, recommend a 2-week school? This may be a bit biased, but here's why. When we hired on with our first trucking company, we were sweating bullets because we were completely new to the industry and didn't know how hard our driving test would be. Sure, we had passed the driving test at school and had our CDLs, but we didn't know if we shifted gears well enough to get hired by a real trucking company. After the road test, our examiner told us we both did very well compared to most rookies. Despite grinding a handful of gears and missing a few downshifts, we had handled the truck well, and after we missed a gear, we were always able to find an appropriate gear and keep the truck safely moving slowly, but moving nonetheless. Later on that day, we noticed one of our fellow drivers was missing from orientation. We inquired about him and found out that he didn't pass the road test and was sent home. It seems he could shift up through a few gears, but every time the examiner asked him to downshift, he couldn't do it. Each time he had to come to a complete stop so he could start back in first gear. We had spoken with him earlier that day and knew he had attended a 2-week school. He was more nervous about the driving test than we were. Turns out, he was nervous for a good reason. It seems he didn't learn very much in 2 weeks. When talking to some experienced drivers about it, they weren't surprised. That's when we learned about CDL farms. CDL farms. It seems that there are plenty of schools out there that really don't care whether you can drive a truck safely or not. These schools are commonly referred to as CDL farms. They're generally very short in duration, and their only goal is to take your money and give you a CDL. This isn't hard to do, considering that many of the class instructors are also the very same people who give you the road test that ultimately determines whether you pass or fail. If you pay the tuition, they'll give you a CDL, even if you can't drive a lick. Just like that guy who got sent home.
Are all them 2-week schools CDL farms?
Well, I wouldn't say that, but it's safe to say the 6-week course that we attended Monday through Friday for 8 hours a day gave us a heck of a lot more driving time than that CDL farm gave that guy. The reality is that even with our intensive 6-week course, we didn't feel we were skilled enough to tackle a tractor-trailer all by our lonesome just yet. Despite our uncertainty, the examiner who hired us told us that we passed with flying colors. So we were good enough, but the confidence just wasn't there yet. Companies that hire inexperienced drivers know what they're getting into and don't expect you to be flawless. But jeepers, it would be nice if a person could at least downshift a truck without coming to a complete stop in the middle of the road. One last word on choosing a truck driving school. This is a part I was talking about earlier as to why it's important to ask what kind of equipment a truck driving school has. I got an email from a guy a while back and he was asking a bunch of questions about getting into the trucking industry. Through a long series of emails, I got to see an outsider's view of his process of finding a driving school, learning to drive, finding a trucking company to work for, and going to orientation. Unfortunately, our emails stalled out there. That's because the trucking company he chose didn't hire him, and he began to doubt his decision to pursue a truck driving career. After hearing what happened, I assured him it wasn't totally his fault. Here's what happened. Like the guy we mentioned a second ago, he was also sent home on the first day of orientation because he failed the road test. He tended to blame himself, and seeing the list of things he needed to work on, I could see why he felt that way. The list included shifting, double clutching, out of gear coasting, lane control, and not knowing where the trailer was at all times. But I didn't see it the same way he did. Granted, I've never met this guy in person, let alone seen him drive, but I bet the evil overlord and I would have both been sent home under similar circumstances. You see, the company he chose to drive for had 13-speed trucks and 53-foot trailers. In our emails, he had neglected to mention, nor had I thought to ask, that his truck driving school used 10-speed trucks and 28-foot trailers. Had I known this ahead of time, I'd have warned him off this school. And this is the tip you need to know. Never go to a truck driving school that doesn't use 48-foot or 53-foot trailers. Quite frankly, it boggles my mind why any trucking school would use short trailers for training when they know the vast majority of their students will be trying to get jobs pulling 53-footers. 25 feet of extra trailer is a huge difference. 28-footers are used in the real world, but even then they're usually pulled in a set of doubles. Very few drivers get to pull a single 28-footer. So why would they use them to train students? So here's what I told my friend. I'll give you the short version. Newbie drivers suck at shifting, and everyone knows this. Any driver that says he could shift gears without grinding from the very start is either a flat-out liar or some sort of idiot trucking savant. So this guy trained on a 10-speed transmission, which is great because that's what the vast majority of trucking companies use nowadays. He's getting better, but he still grinds the gears quite often. Only now he's trying to impress a tester while he's learning a new shift pattern. 13 speeds are a lot different. Naturally, he's missing even more gears because of it. When you don't want to grind gears, you avoid shifting, which leads to the out-of-gear coasting the tester complained about. Remember how I said I coasted up to stop signs on my maiden voyage in order to avoid downshifting? But that's not his only worry. He's also pulling a trailer that's 25 feet longer than he's used to. No wonder he has poor lane control and hit a curb or two. He's worried about the extra length, but he's too busy looking down at the shifter to give proper attention to where his trailer is. So to sum up with this, know what you're getting into before you try to get a job with the company. Again, if this guy had how to find a great truck driving job on his virtual bookshelf, he'd have probably asked and known that this carrier used 53-foot trailers and that he'd also be dealing with the differentness of a 13-speed tranny. Perhaps he'd have kept looking until he found a carrier had 10 speeds.
At least then he could have concentrated more on the longer trailer.
What you'll learn in truck driving school. The first thing you'll learn is the written exam information you'll need to know to obtain your learner's permit. Your learner's permit is what enables you to drive a truck on public roads, provided there's a licensed driver, your instructor, in the truck with you. It's just like the learner's permit you may have gotten when you were 15 years old, only this learner's permit is for a commercial truck. Your bookwork will teach you written tests. You'll cover all information that's needed to pass your written exams and any endorsements you want to obtain. Road rules. This covers road signs, what lanes you need to be in to make a turn, etc. Defensive driving. Teaches you to watch out for other drivers, look down the road, leave extra stopping distance, blind spots, general driving safety, etc. Operational aspects of a truck. This will cover how to adjust your brakes, do a pre-trip inspection on your tractor and trailer, which is required, etc. Safety. Wearing protective gear, how to avoid slips and falls, hazardous materials, emergency procedures, etc. Logbooks. All truck drivers except local drivers are required by law to keep a logbook. This involves keeping a running log of every stop you make in every city and state. A brief summary, you can legally drive for 11 hours before taking a mandatory 10-hour break.
You cannot work longer than a 14-hour day.
You can work a maximum of 70 hours in 8 days. If you shut down for 34 continuous hours, you can restart your 70-hour work week, provided there are 2 periods of 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. inside the 34 hours. You can also do only one 70-hour restart per week. Of course, that's not all the rules, but that does give you a general idea. And map reading. How to figure mileages and routing, east-west interstates are even numbers, north-south interstates are odd numbers, etc. The second part of driving school is the hands-on driving. You'll get assigned to an instructor who will be with you as you learn. Depending on your class size, you could have your instructor all to yourself or share them with 2 or 3 other students who will ride along with you. Your driving work will teach you shifting, upshifting and downshifting at specific RPM points, that's motor speed, skip shifting and double clutching, lane control, lane positioning, lane changing, taking wide turns, etc. Defensive driving, putting your book learning to practice, driving in traffic, etc. Exit and entrance ramps, getting on and off an interstate safely. Backing, how to safely back a truck. And emergency maneuvers, how to control the truck in emergency situations, roadside emergency procedures, etc. Shifting a truck is one of the hardest things for new drivers to grasp. Shifting a commercial truck is nothing like shifting a car. For starters, your personal vehicle probably has 5 gears. A typical big rig will have anywhere from 9 to 18 gears. Also, the inner workings of the transmission are totally different. In your car, you can match the clutch to the floor and put it in any gear you want at any time. That is, if you're stupid enough to do so. That ain't happening in a truck. You have to shift at certain times or it simply won't go into gear. Most experienced drivers shift a truck without the use of a clutch pedal by listening to the motor and feeling when it's time to shift. This is called floating the gears. You'll most likely have to figure this out when you hit the road alone. I guarantee your instructor knows how to float them, but they probably won't show you unless you ask. Even then, you'll likely only get a quick example. This is mainly because the majority of trucking companies will expect you to use a clutch during your road test with them. What you do after that is your own business. If you want to reduce the wear and tear on your left knee, you'll want to teach yourself to float them ASAP. For now, your school would teach you what is called double clutching. Without getting too technical, it's a timing process of partially depressing the clutch pedal to pull the transmission out of gear, letting up, then partially depressing the clutch pedal again, and putting the transmission into the desired gear when the motor hits a certain RPM, that's revolutions per minute. It sounds harder than it is. Once you get the hang of it, you'll be able to double clutch and shift almost as fast as you can shift your car. Still, it's not an easy process to get used to, especially downshifting. Despite logical thinking, downshift requires you to raise the RPMs. In other words, press on the accelerator during the downshift. In the beginning, it was hard for me to wrap my pea-brain around the thought of pushing on the accelerator to slow down, but it works. It's especially hard to do while going down a big hill or mountain. If you're going too fast and you miss a downshift, you're effectively coasting down a mountain. That's not a good thing. Better learn how to downshift or hope and pray your brakes hold up.
I've provided a link to an article I wrote called Automatic or Manual Truck Transmission. Check that out.
If you find that you absolutely hate shifting, don't give up just yet. You've still got options. Keep trying to learn to shift. You need to get good enough to at least pass your driving test to obtain your CDL. Once you've graduated, you can go to work for a company that has fully automatic trucks. Yep, you heard that right. There are a number of companies that have fully automatic transmissions in all or most of their fleet trucks. Some automatic transmission trucks are just like your car, having just an accelerator and a brake pedal. Others require you to depress the clutch pedal, but only when you come to a complete stop or taking off. Some old-timers hate automatics, but I love them. This would have been a great option for that guy who got sent home from orientation because he couldn't downshift. I've worked for a couple of companies that have fully automatic trucks and know that both of them I have worked for are good companies. One I quit only because the evil overlord got out of the truck and I found a better company for solo drivers. The other was a great company also, but I had one of those bad days, lost my cool, and quit under less than ideal circumstances. See, I told you I wasn't perfect, and oh so honest. It wasn't a very smart move, losing my cool like that, even if they were being lying jerks at the time. That sometimes happens when both people on opposite ends of a phone line are having equally bad days. If you don't want to fool with learning how to shift at all, you might want to find one of those companies and ask if they operate a driving school. I know one of them used to, but I'm not really sure anymore. The only problem with this is that you'll learn to drive in an automatic, so you better hope you like the company. After all, if you never learn to manually shift gears, your job options will be limited to companies that have automatic trucks. Quite frankly, that's not very many. Want to attend driving school with your spouse, but can't afford a lack of income for that much time? Do what we did. It will take a bit longer, but it worked for us. It took the evil overlord and me about 3 months from the time we quit the egg packing plant to the time we hired on with our first trucking company. You may recall that I couldn't attend K-State because we had too many bills to pay. What that meant was that one of us had to continue working while the other attended driving school. We decided to send the evil overlord to school first. That way, if she couldn't handle it, or simply hated it, we would have only wasted her tuition. I was really never worried about her not being able to handle a truck because, quite honestly, she's always been a better driver than me. I know that's not a very macho thing to say, but it's the truth, and we both know it. That is, except for backing a semi. I'm pretty darn tootin' good at that, if I do say so myself. It was the second part I was worried about. If she hated it, we'd have to come up with a plan C, and I was fresh out of ideas. Thank God she didn't. After she graduated the 6-week school, she went to work, not driving, while I went to class. 6 weeks later, we were taking a driving test at our first trucking company. So you can see that under better circumstances, we could have been done in 6 weeks. I need to warn you about something here before you both quit your jobs. If you're planning to go to driving school together so you can train in the same truck, you may want to contact the school about that before you enroll. Our school wouldn't have let us train in the same truck even if we had been in the same class. It seems that under a stressful situation like trying to learn to drive a truck, most spouses don't appreciate unsolicited advice from their partner. Who would have guessed? Apparently, it had resulted in too many marital spats in the past, so they had implemented the separation rule. It makes sense. The last thing you need while trying to downshift and avoid rear-ending that Dodge Neon is a nagging spouse. Well, you've taken your final road test and you've graduated from driving school. Congratulations! You're likely still grinding the gears and pretending they're made of rubber, but don't worry about that. You'll be shifting like a pro before too long. The next step is to find a job. You'll need to figure out what kind of company you want to drive for. Do you want to pull vans, reefers, flatbeds, curtain sides, tankers, containers, covered wagons, or what? Which one is best? How do you know if a company is reputable? How do you know if the pay package is good? What kind of equipment do they have? What is stop pay? What is a performance bonus? Are these enough questions for you? I could go on. In order to find a good trucking company, there are many more questions that you'll need to ask a company's recruiter. How do you know what to ask without having ever driven before? How do you keep from getting suckered? This topic is far too large to fit into this book. What to do? You can probably guess where this is going. I've got just the thing for you. The ultimate guide to finding that great truck driving job is at your fingertips, complete with a printable list of questions so you won't forget to ask anything. I'm quite transparent, aren't I? Still, it is a great way to find a company that'll fit you. I might be a bit biased, though. You think? I've provided another link in case you didn't catch it the first million times I've pimped it. Hopefully, it'll be finished by the time you're listening to this. If it isn't, it will be soon, so please check back. After you find that great job, it's off to orientation.